Next, we'll be moving on to discuss gradients. We have the gradients palette drawer here, which is found under Window, Palette Drawers, and we have gradients. In the gradients panel, you can see which gradient we have selected. You can also change the gradient here to a different gradient type. We could change it to orange flame, and now you can see what it looks like. There's different modes of the gradients. You can create a gradient in a couple of different ways. One is you can create a selection, and you can fill it, and you can choose a gradient. You can also fill your entire canvas with a gradient. Another way to do it is to select the interactive gradient tool, and that will let you draw the gradient. So I can just drag a line like this, and I can move these individual nodes around to reshape the gradient. I can make the yellow go more closer to the bright yellow here and make kind of a horizon. So I could use this to make a sky for a painting. I could use it to shade objects. I could use it for a lot of different things. Let's go ahead and go with that. Now we have that nice sunset sky, and we could start painting all kinds of stuff into this. We can layer up gradients as well. I could create a new layer here. I could select circular gradient. We'll go ahead and put in a sun over here in the sky. But what we want to do now is we want to go to gradient node. We want to click on this node here for the blue, and we want to reduce the opacity of that. Then it will go to transparency. And let's actually go ahead and change the color of the node as well. Let's make it a yellowish white color. Now it fades out to yellow. Now we have control over our sun. We can bring this color in more if we wanted to, like this. Or we could bring this out a bit more like that and bring this in to make the sun smaller. Click on the check to commit to that change. And there you go. We've drawn a sun using a gradient. Now we could change the composite method of that, and we could set it to screen if we wanted to. We could make it blend in like that. We could set it to multiply if we want it to be darker and blend. So we really have a lot of control over our gradient once we create it. I'm going to go ahead and select the interactive gradient tool again. I'm going to draw another gradient here. There are other modes, such as spiral. There's radial gradient. If we switch back to linear, there's different modes for the linear as well. I'm going to go ahead and clear my canvas now, and I'll draw a rectangle here to place our gradient into. And let's try the metal cylinder preset. I'm going to make sure I have linear gradient selected, and then we have a mode here called mirrored left to right. So I'll go ahead and use that with the interactive gradient tool. And now you can see I can get kind of a cylindrical effect when I do that. Then I have control over all the nodes here. So I could have the highlight more on this side if I wanted to. Click on the check to commit. Now you can see we can use it to shade objects. I'll draw another gradient in here. When I held shift, it kept that in a straight line. Now this is a mirrored gradient, so we'll need to move this bottom node up a bit because this bottom node is the center point, and beyond that point the gradient is going to mirror in the opposite direction. So you can see now as we start to bring it in, it starts to mirror. If we line it up just perfectly, then we get a nice result like this. And now it looks like we have a cylindrical object. You'll also notice that up in the properties bar we have access to our preset, and we have access to all the different modes for the gradients. We can also reverse the order of the colors in the gradient if we want to. So for example, I'll select a different gradient here. Let's try chrome sky, and we'll draw in that. And we can reverse the order to swap it back and forth. Now we can also blend the currently active gradient with the layers underneath by selecting a composite method up here in the properties bar. We could choose screen or multiply to blend it, or we can choose opacity and we can blend it with opacity. Go ahead and set that back to normal. Smooth creates a smoother color transition, so you probably want to keep that checked. If you uncheck it, you might get some banding in your gradient. We're going to come back to Express Paint in just a bit. We can also enable or disable the gradient nodes. If we have them disabled, then that's automatically going to commit the gradient when we draw it, but does not display the editable nodes. If I turn edit nodes back on, then when I draw, I'll get the nodes that I can edit, but I'll also have to commit to the gradient to apply it. Or if you don't want the gradient, you can cancel it. We can also extend the color of the start and end nodes to fill the document or selection. There's also an option to mirror the gradient on either side of the start and end nodes. So we can do that, and now it's going to mirror and kind of loop throughout the image. Then there's this third option, repeat the gradient on either side of the start and end nodes. We can do that, and now it repeats that way, and you can create a pattern like this. There's also an option to show or hide the gradients panel. and to show or hide the gradient node panel. So the gradient node panel just lets you manipulate the individual nodes. Once you select a node, you can change its color and its opacity. So you can have it fade out to transparency if you want to. You can click on the line to create nodes, and that'll create an intermediate color there. You can change the color of the currently selected node using the gradient node panel, or you can use the regular color wheel. And you can remove nodes from the gradient using the delete node button. You can select a node and you can change its position numerically if you want to. I'm going to go ahead and change to a spiral gradient. Now you can rotate the gradient as well, and you can hypnotize people. And you can set the spiral rate to create a more dense spiral like this. There are some options in the gradient subdialog. You can rename gradients, set custom icons. You can edit and save the gradients. In the gradient libraries, you can select from gradients here. You have options to create your own libraries and import and export them. You can click on the top subright dialog, and some of those same options are here as well. So if I wanted to create my own gradient, I could start with a template here like this. And I could change some of these nodes. Let's say we want that node to be a red-orange color like that. And we want this bottom one here to be very dark, kind of like that. We'll go ahead and click on the check to commit. And if we want to save that as a gradient, we go back to gradients, we click on the top right, and we choose save gradient. I'll call this dark sunset. I'll click OK. Now you can see I have dark sunset saved here. If I go to gradient libraries, then I can choose that anytime I want. And of course, I could add that to my own library, and I could save it by exporting my library. There are a few other features and effects in Corel Painter that can use the gradient. If you want to learn more about that, you can check out the Corel Painter help guide. But basically, anytime you see gradient in a menu, you know that it's going to be basing the color off of the gradient. Now let's move on to Express Paint. When I have the interactive gradient tool selected, up in the properties bar, you can see Express Paint appears. And there are a few different modes, and Express Paint is basically going to paint over my gradient. It's going to be kind of similar to how we were auto painting earlier with cloning, but rather than getting the colors from the clone source, it'll get the colors from the gradient. So right now we have none. Let's go ahead and turn on Preview Effect. We won't see anything happen until we choose one of these options. Let's choose Jittery Strokes. Now I'll go ahead and draw a gradient. And once I do, it starts blending over it and adding little dabs, and then it stops. Let's go back to Express Paint now, and while that's still live, we can change this to a different type of dab. Now it's heavier dabs that break it up more, and now it kind of looks like fire. And we can still adjust this on the fly, and it'll redraw each time. Let's go back to Express Paint. Let's try diagonal strokes. You can see that didn't really do a whole lot, so we might want to go in and edit that, and we can change the size. If we want to create larger strokes. Now we start to see it a bit more down here on the bottom, and we can increase the amount if we want it to blend for a lot longer. Let's add more amount, and each time it'll redraw it and just do more and more strokes for longer each time. Let's add a lot more now. Now you can see down there on the bottom, it added a lot of strokes. It kind of looks like a distant field of wheat. That's kind of cool. If we wanted to, we could move these nodes up here, and it'll redraw it again. If you want to stop the process, you can just click or tap. I'll go ahead and just redraw that gradient again. So one of the ways that I might use Express Paint is to quickly create a painterly background. So I've chosen the colors that I want, but rather than go in and have to blend it myself, I can just quickly blend it like this. I can tap to stop when I'm happy with it, and now I have a nice background. You could get that same effect just by drawing the gradient, and then you could choose a blender such as Coarse Smear Blender Jitter, make a really big brush here, and blend, and you get something that's basically the same result. It's really up to you what you prefer, but the advantage is that you don't have to do an undo and then paint again to see how it looks. You can simply go to your interactive gradient tool, draw the gradient, go to Express Paint, select heavy dabs, then you can preview it, you can stop it, and you can make those adjustments to the gradient without having to undo and then redraw the paint again. So I don't have to repaint the sky to be able to test out some different results. So it lets me experiment until I'm happy with what I get. So I kind of like that. When I click on that to commit, to me this kind of looks like a sky with some trees in the background. So maybe that would be the starting point for my painting. And then I could select some other brushes, such as Oily Bristle, and I could go in here and add in some more trees and some other details and use this as a starting point for my painting. Add in some little leaves on this tree and some ground and really whatever I want. So Express Paint is a really powerful feature. Now you can do an Express Paint inside of a selection as well. I could create a selection here. I can draw a gradient into that. Let's pick a different color though. Let's go ahead and pick something like this. And we can Express Paint that. And it's going to keep it within that selection. It did blend to transparency, so if it blended out a bit, then it kind of went outside of the shape. But for the most part, it stayed in there. We'll commit to the gradient, and there you go. Now, the last thing I want to mention with gradients is that you can use them for masking. So I'm going to go ahead and fill the canvas here. Let's fill it with Chrome Sky. And I'm going to create a new layer. I'll make a nice bright ball here like this with the scratch board. And we'll take a look at masking away some of this using a gradient. So I'm going to create a layer mask on that layer. And if I were to paint into that mask using the airbrush with black, then I could make it semi-transparent in those areas, or even fully transparent if I add enough black. I'm not erasing it, I'm just concealing some of that area, and if I select white, then I can bring that paint back, like so. If you want a refresher on masks, go back to that section about masking. I'm going to go ahead and do a couple of undos here before I added anything to the mask, and we can use the interactive gradient tool to mask as well. I'm going to select linear gradient, and then for my preset, I want main to additional color. I want my main color to be black. I'll go ahead and toggle to the additional color. I'm going to make that white, and I'll just toggle back to black. Now with the mask selected, if I draw here and make a gradient, then you can see that wherever it's black, that's where it's going to be transparent, and I can adjust that mask. Now maybe the linear gradient isn't the best example here. Let's go ahead and change it to the circular. And let's also reverse the order of the nodes. So now you can see, if I want to, I can make it kind of transparent in the middle here if I wanted to, and then have that fade out to the edge like so. This could create kind of a bubble effect or a glass ball effect. Click on the check to commit. And then the advantage then is that I can go back to the layer and I could paint on it. If I wanted to turn on preserve transparency and add some other colors with another brush, it's still respecting that transparency of the mask. And so if I take that layer and I move it around, you can see that wherever I added transparency to the mask is still transparent. Now I wouldn't be able to go into that mask and edit those nodes for the gradient. I just have to redraw the gradient in the mask again if that's what I wanted to do. Again, I need black to white. And as long as I have black to white, then that will work great. And you can see, can really easily mask out part of this image. Now I could add an intermediate node as well, and I could bring that in like this. I could have kind of a sharper contour to this. Well, that really gives you a lot of flexibility when you're working with masks.